Welcome, students. We're diving right into this premium study session today, and our goal, completely mastering CBSE Class 10 Biology, Chapter 7, Reproduction. Think of this explainer as your ultimate study companion. We're going to cover every single critical concept, every diagram, and those all-important previous year questions from the NCERT textbook, so you are 100% prepared. Mastering reproduction equals assured board marks. And it's so true. This chapter carries massive weight in your board exams. Seriously, by the end of this session, we're going to lock in those marks, and honestly, you won't even need to reread the textbook. We've got it all right here. Okay, here is our roadmap for today. We've got 6 parts. First, the basics of reproduction, then asexual reproduction types, plant sexual reproduction, the human reproductive system, reproductive health and contraceptives, and finally, our ultimate board exam revision. Let's get into it. Section 1, Basics of Reproduction. So the absolute first step of life is reproduction, right? It's literally the biological process of creating new individuals. But here's the catch. Before a cell can divide, it absolutely must create a replica of its DNA. Think of it like photocopying a master blueprint for a house. This DNA copying is what ensures the basic body design is passed down. No DNA copying? Well, then there's no inheritance of traits. It's that simple. Now, organisms basically take one of 2 pathways to pass down that DNA blueprint. First, we have asexual reproduction. This involves just a single parent. It's a super fast process, but the offspring, they're practically clones. Then, on the flip side, we have sexual reproduction. This requires 2 parents. Yeah, it takes way more time and energy, but here's the magic. It creates genetic variation. And write this down for your exams. Variation is the ultimate secret weapon for a species to survive long-term in a constantly changing environment. Moving right along to Section 2, Asexual Reproduction Types. Okay, whether we're talking about fission, budding, spore formation, regeneration, fragmentation, or vegetative propagation, the golden rule remains exactly the same. Every single one of these involves only a single parent. 0 gametes, meaning no sex cells, are involved here whatsoever. Let's pause for a quick in-text PYQ check. That's a previous year question, by the way. Active recall is how we actually lock these concepts into our brains. So, based on your NCERT notes, which specific asexual method is used by an amoeba and which one is used by yeast? Take a second. Think about it. Got it? All right, let's see if you nailed it. Amoeba uses fission. Actually, scratch that. It's specifically binary fission, where it splits right down the middle into 2 equal halves. Yeast, on the other hand, uses budding. That's where a tiny little outgrowth, or a bud, pops up on the parent cell and eventually detaches to become a totally new yeast cell. These are super high-yield examples, so definitely keep them memorized. All right, Section 3, Plant Sexual Reproduction. So, the crucial step in plants is pollination. That's simply the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma. Now, self-pollination happens within the exact same flower or maybe between flowers on the same plant. Cross-pollination, though, occurs when pollen travels to a completely different plant of the same species. Examiners absolutely love testing this difference. They're usually looking for you to mention external agents, like the wind blowing or bees buzzing around, that help make that cross-pollination happen. And all of this builds into a really precise biological sequence to create a seed. First up, pollination. Next, a tiny pollen tube actually forms, carrying the male germ cell all the way downward. Step 3 is fertilization, which happens deep inside the ovary. That fusion creates what we call a zygote, which then develops into an embryo. And finally, the ovule develops this really tough outer coat and officially becomes the seed. It's like a perfectly choreographed dance. Let's shift gears to Section 4, Human Reproductive System. Before we discuss the systems that eventually combine to create that vital genetic variation we talked about earlier, we really have to understand puberty. That's the period when sexual maturity is actually reached. For males, you're looking at a deeper voice, facial hair growth, and broader shoulders, and that's all largely driven by the hormone testosterone. For females, the changes include breast development, the widening of hips, and the start of the menstrual cycle, which is driven by estrogen. Now, when these systems interact, a very specific sequence unfolds. First, an egg is released from the ovary. Second, millions of sperm enter the female reproductive tract. Third, and pay close attention because this is highly tested, the actual fusion of the sperm and the egg happens in the fallopian tube. Not the uterus, fallopian tube.
Finally, the resulting zygote travels down and implants itself safely into the soft lining of the uterus to grow. Section 5. Reproductive Health and Contraceptives.
Understanding these contraceptive methods is honestly going to earn you some really easy marks. We have barrier methods, like condoms, which physically block the sperm. Then there are chemical methods, like oral pills, which actually alter hormone balances to stop egg release altogether. We've got intrauterine devices, or IUDs, like the copper T, which are safely placed right in the uterus. And lastly, surgical methods, which offer permanent solutions, think vasectomies for males or tubal ligations for females.
Okay, let's test your conceptual understanding here. We know how contraception works, right? But why is reproductive health and contraception so critically important for society as a whole? I want you to think beyond just the biology for a second. Well, here are your high-yield answers for literally any 3-mark Bode question on this topic. First, barrier methods specifically prevent the spread of STDs or sexually transmitted diseases. Second, contraception helps manage massive population growth by allowing for family planning. And third, it protects maternal health. How? By ensuring adequate gaps between pregnancies, which gives the mother's body the time it needs to fully recover. Always, always write these 3 points. And here we are at Section 6, Ultimate Board Exam Revision. Let's quickly highlight a common trap examiners see year after year. Students constantly, and I mean constantly, confuse binary fission with multiple fission. Let's fix that right now. The correct concept? Amoeba uses binary fission, bi meaning 2, so it splits into exactly 2. But Plasmodium, which is the malaria parasite, uses multiple fission, meaning it splits into many, many daughter cells simultaneously. Don't lose easy points on this. Let's trace the macro-level journey we just took today. We started with the basics of DNA copying, branched out into single-parent asexual types, grew into the pollination of plant systems, matured into human systems and fertilization, and finally applied all to reproductive health. Honestly, if you can clearly explain just one concept from each of these steps, your preparation is absolutely rock solid. All right, I'm leaving you with a homework PYQ. We talked a lot about what happens when fertilization does occur. But what happens in the human female body if the egg is not fertilized? What exactly happens to that thick, spongy uterine lining that's spent all month preparing for a baby? Well, because it's not needed, that thick lining breaks down and is released from the body, which is the biological process of menstruation. You guys have done incredible work today, mastering these core concepts. You are now entirely ready to crush your CBSE biology exam. But before you log off, think about this. If reproduction is the single mechanism that ensures the continuation of a species, how might future extreme environmental changes force human reproduction itself to evolve? Keep questioning, keep studying, and I will see you in the next explainer.